Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Nader. In this video, we're going to go over filter for arrays. This is the second of three functional array methods we're going through. We went through map already. This is filter, and then we're going to go through reduce next. Filter allows us to manipulate arrays very similar to map, but in a slightly different way where we can actually filter out values and get back a smaller array with the extra values that we don't need filtered out. So that said, let's get right into it. Okay, so I'd like to start with this funky drawing here that I have. Quite a lot going on, but just like the last video, let's kind of break it apart piece by piece. I also am going to bring up the documentation so we can go through this really quick together so we can see what it actually looks like on something like MDN. To start, I would like to focus really on this part right here, the part that I have highlighted with my mouse in blue. So if we look at this code, we can see that we're creating a const called mCities, and that's going to point at whatever is on the right hand side, which in this case is taking cities, which let's just assume for now is an array. And instead of calling map, we're going to call filter, which is another method that only works on arrays. So if we have an array, we can call map, we can call filter, and we can call reduce, which we're going to look at next. So if we call filter, very similar to map, filter method takes a function. And this function has a few different parameters, but the most important one is the first parameter, which in this case is what I'm providing. In this example, I'm calling it city because of the context of kind of what we're working in with cities. However, you would call this kind of whatever you like, depending on the actual array that you're filtering through. So this function is going to be run for every single element inside of the cities array in this case. Okay, so it's going to be run one time per item in the input array. So the input array in this case being cities. The return value from filter is very different from map. The filter function expects a Boolean return, and that's to say a true or a false return value. Now there's some caveats and tricks with this, which we'll get into shortly, but let's just assume it's only true or only false. In this case, we're using, this function right here, or this method, I should say, on strings, which is called starts with. I actually realize I have a missing S there. So we're asking if this string that we're looking at right now starts with, in this case, the letter M. Okay, so this is going to return back true or false depending on if that string starts with letter M. So for Madrid, that would be true because it starts with M. For Vancouver, that would be false. Mumbai, that would be true. New York, that would be false. Okay, so if the value returned by that iteration in the loop for filter is true, then we keep that value in the result array, in this case mCities. If the return value is false, then we discard that element and we don't input it into the result array. I say discard, but you can really think of it as we ignore it. Okay. The nice thing about these functional programming methods like filter, map, and reduce is that we don't ever actually change the input array. Okay. The input array is going to remain untouched. And we're only going to have a result array, which is going to be the copy that has some values inside of it. Unlike map, where the result array is always going to have the same amount of elements as the input array, filter can actually return us back a copied array that has either the same amount of elements or less if we end up filtering elements out. So if we look at this example, we are filtering through cities, and we're taking each city and asking if that city starts with the letter M. If we go through this array one at a time, cities up here in orange, the first item is going to be Madrid. And we're going to pump Madrid through this function as an argument. And city is going to be Madrid the first time. We're going to ask, does Madrid start with M? Yes, it does. So we actually keep it, right? We keep Madrid in the result set, in the result array. Then we move on to the next item, Vancouver. We say, hey, does Vancouver start with the letter M? No, it doesn't, right? So we ignore it. We don't actually put that in the result array. We do the same for Mumbai. Mumbai does start with M. We put that in the result array. So now we have 2 items in the result array, which is M cities. Then we ask New York finally, which is our last item. New York doesn't start with M, it starts with N. So we ignore that as well. So our result array M cities is going to be only Madrid and Mumbai, and it's going to have 2 items in it, even though our input list had 4 items in it. Our input list is unchanged, it still has the 4 items, and if we were to print out cities after this operation, it would still have these 4 items, but M cities is only going to have the 2 items that start with the letter M, because that's what our filter function is looking for. So before we get into code, I just want to pull up the documentation, because as you're learning these methods, you're going to want to kind of look at other types of methods that are very similar to it, or very kind of edge case things, which means things that might throw it off, or other kind of related or tangentially related functions in this kind of series of arrays. So if we pull up Google real quick, so I'm just going to go to Google Chrome here, just going to zoom in a little bit. Always have the trending searches. I'm going to search for array filter JavaScript, and we'll get our search result page. I'm going to go with my favorite documentation, which is the Mozilla documentation, MDN web docs. That's developer.mozilla.org. You can use any docs, it doesn't really matter. I just love the MDN docs very much, and I think that they have good examples in there as well. So in this case, it's array prototype filter, but we can ignore the prototype for now. We'll get into that in future videos. So if we click on this, we'll end up on a page that looks like this. And very similar to map, we have kind of the name of the function that we're looking at, which is filter. And it's saying that filter is a method that creates a shallow copy, whatever that means, of a portion of a given array filtered down to just the elements from the given array that pass the test implemented by the provided function. All right, that's a lot of words, but let's look at an example that they have down here, very similar to the example that I drew out for you. If we have words as an array of strings, in this case 6 different strings, and we're creating a new variable called result, and we're pointing it at whatever comes back from words.filter, where we're giving it each word. This is using the new ES6 kind of inline arrow function syntax, so we're missing some bits of syntax that make it a bit more concise, but we're giving it each word as an argument, and we're asking, is the word length greater than 6? If the word length is greater than 6, we want to keep it in the result array. Otherwise, we want to discard it, or we want to ignore it from the result array. So if we look at the result array, which is what they're saying right here, we're going to have the words, in this case 3 of them, that have a length greater than 6. Okay, so in more plain English, just to really reiterate what this is doing, filter is a method on arrays that takes a function. That function has several parameters, which we can look at down here later, starting in the syntax section. But the most important one is the first parameter. We can call it whatever we like. In this case, we're calling it word. In my previous example, I think we called it city. And we return either true or false in that function. If it's true, then we keep the element that we're iterating over, or that we're looping over. If it's false, then we discard, or we ignore that element that we're looping over. So the result array is going to be a set of elements from the input array that have been filtered based on what that filter function is meant to return, true or false. So in this case, only words that are greater than 6, length of 6. Okay, so let's get right to the code, and then we'll look at another kind of example visually. So if I open up Visual Studio Code, I'll just close this, and I'll create a new file. I'm going to call this filter-intro.js. And I'm going to create an array of numbers to start. So I'll say const nums is equal to, and let's just say 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now, let's say that I want to keep all of the even numbers in this array. All right, so how would we do that? Let's create a new variable. Let's call it even numbers. And we're going to take the numbers array, and we know that arrays have a method on them called filter. So we're going to say nums.filter. filter takes a function as its argument. So I'm going to give it an arrow function. And this arrow function takes a few parameters, but we're most interested in the first parameter, which is the value each time this is being looped. This is going to be automatically given to us by JavaScript every single time this function is called, one time for each element inside the input array. In this case, the input array being nums. So given that nums is plural, I'm going to just say we're going to get one num back for each iteration of this filter. All right. So I'm going to say if num, and to check if even, we do if mod 2, right? If the remainder with 2 is exactly equal to 0, then it's even, and we want to keep it. So I want to return true. Else, I want to return false. And we've seen in previous videos that we can kind of, since we only return true or false in this function, we don't really need the else. We can actually just keep it like so. Okay? If it's even, we keep it by returning true. Otherwise, the only other case is return false, and we filter it out. So I'm going to log out nums and also even numbers. All right, I'm going to pull up my terminal, make sure I'm in the right folder, and I am. I'm going to use node. I'm going to do filter intro.js, and let's look at our results. So our input array, which is what's being logged on line 10, is nums, and that's exactly what we see up here, which is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Our filtered array, which is even nums, is going to be 6, 8, and 10, which are the only even numbers in that input array, which is pretty cool, right? So we got an array of 3 items from an array of 6 items in this case, okay? So how does this work, right? We are calling this function right here that I have highlighted, this function with each number one at a time inside this input array, and we're checking to see if we get back true or false. If it's true, then we put it into the result array, the copy, which is even numbers, which is a new array. We keep 6, we keep 8, and we keep 10 because 5, 7, and 9 return false. So we don't put them inside of even numbers. Nums has been unchanged during this process. It continues to be this array right here. We didn't modify it at all. Even numbers is a brand new array in memory that is consisting of these 3 items. Okay, so to really hammer that last point home, because it really is very, very crucial when you're working with these functional methods, I just want to show the memory representation of what this array looks like. So I have this drawing right here. On the left-hand side, I have the code, and on the right-hand side, I have the table or the memory representation inside the actual computer. So let's go through this really quick. I have animals here, which is a const, which is pointing to this array of 5 animals, or 4 animals, I should say, an array of 4 strings, right? And that is creating this space in memory right here in orange, and we're pointing animals at it, and it starts with monkey, dog, cat, and deer. And each of them gets their own indexes or indices because it's an array. So monkey is at index 0, dog is at index 1, cat at index 2, and deer at index 3. Just like we saw in the array basics video. Okay. Next, though, what we're doing is we're creating another variable. We're calling this d_animals, and we're taking the original animals array and we're calling filter on it. And we're calling each item animal in this case, which kind of makes sense because there's plural as animals and singular would be animal. And we're saying, hey, return the result of animal dot starts with the letter D. Okay, so what this does with strings is it returns true if the string starts with that letter, and it returns false if it doesn't. So in this case, it's going to return false for monkey, true for dog, false for cat, and true for deer. What's going to end up being the result that actually d_animals points at is an array with the 2 items inside of animals that are starting with the letter D. However, most importantly, d_animals is pointing to a new block of memory for that array. So it does not point up to dog and deer up here inside of animals. It's actually making a copy of them and pointing to them inside of a new block in memory. Now there's some exception to this where that shallow copy thing comes in, but for now, let's not worry about that too much. Let's focus on the fact that this is creating a copy for us. Okay, so this is two separate blocks of memory. If we change animals, we do not change D animals, and if we change D animals, we do not change animals. All right, great. Now, before we kind of wrap up here, I just want to point out a couple of things that I've seen trip myself up and many other people up when they first start learning filter. Technically speaking, filter should only be returning true or false inside of the filter function, the function that we provide to filter. However, I want to show you something interesting. If I create a new file and I call it filter dash, I'll say bugs.js. I'm going to take this same array, numbers, just so I don't have to retype it out. I'm going to say, I'm going to create another element or array, sorry, and I'll call it, let's say, odd numbers. And we'll take nums and we'll do filter on it just to keep it slightly different. And we're going to take each number and let's do this. Let's just say if number mod 2, and since this is odd numbers, I want to make sure that all the odd numbers are kept and the even numbers are thrown out, right? So if mod 2 is equal to 1 this time instead of 0, then I want to return true. Now I want you to know something. I'm not going to return false in this function. Okay, unlike this function right here where I returned false if I didn't return true. If it wasn't even, I returned false for the odd case. This time I want to show you that I'm only going to return true for the odd case. And I want you to think of what actually gets returned if I keep it this way for the even case. All right, so if you gave it a think, the answer is that any function in JavaScript that doesn't return something explicitly. So in this case, if we fail this conditional check and we don't explicitly return true, we end up down here, right? And what are we returning down here? There is no return statement. By default, every single function in JavaScript that doesn't return something explicitly will return undefined. So then the question is, what does filter do if we return undefined? So let's check it out. I'm going to console log out nums, and then I'm going to console log out odd nums. I'll clear this out, and I'm going to use node filter bugs. And I want you to notice something really interesting. First, we have our array nums right here, and that's working as expected, right? Line 11 is console logging out this array, and that's what we've seen all along. However, even if we don't explicitly return false in this example for odd numbers, we still seem to have the correct answer. We're only getting the odd numbers filtered out from numbers. We're getting 5, 7, and 9. 6 and 8 and 10 are not being included in odd numbers. So this appears to be working, right? So why is this? The reason is that technically filter looks for truthy and falsy values. And this is something that has tripped myself and many people up countless times. I can't even count anymore, right? If you don't return anything, undefined is returned by default. If you return things like null, or you return even like a string, for example, like imagine I return a string or I return a number that's not 0, those are considered truthy values in JavaScript. So to show you what I mean, I'll return the number 100. Okay, this is definitely not true or false. Okay, and if I run this, you'll see that I actually get the same result, which is very, very strange, right? Because like we're filtering and then we're returning not true and not false, but we're returning 100. So what does that really mean, 100? This is very confusing. And this is kind of one of the criticisms of JavaScript. However, it's very easy to kind of work around once you understand what's happening. This is a truthy value. Truthy, okay, which means it's true-like. It's not treated as a falsy value. Falsy values, as we learned in the primitive types and the Boolean videos is things like null, undefined, zero, the empty string, and a few other things are considered falsy. Okay, be really, really careful with this. When you're using filter, the most important thing to keep in mind is always, always, always remember to explicitly return true or false, so that in every case, when you run through this function, the function will either return true or it will return false. Do not leave it up to JavaScript to do funky stuff like this, where we're accidentally returning undefined, because it gets very confusing and causes lots of bugs, especially when your functions get really, really long and you're trying to filter on more complex behavior. And you definitely don't want to rely on truthy values like this either, because for someone reading this code, it is really, really confusing. Okay. So I'm really excited to get into some exercises for this video and to tease your brain some more and to go over some even more weird cases. So that's going to be what the next video is about. Following that, we're going to go over kind of the other third functional method that I was hinting at, which is called reduce, which is actually quite different from both map and filter that we've seen so far. So if you found this video valuable, I would love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. As well, I'd love to hear in the comments like if you had any questions about this or any of the truthy, falsy stuff with the filter is confusing, because it's definitely very different from map. But I highly encourage you to also join me in the next video where we can look at exercises for filters specifically together and maybe even throw in a bonus question or two. Can't wait to get to that video. I'll see you there.